Welcome to the Tuesday edition of Juan's World, and I'm going to continue my discussion of Genesis. And today I'm going to ask the most basic of questions that I asked when I first started writing about the book a long time ago. As I told you, I did teach the book for many years. I started about 45 years ago, but I started writing a book about Genesis about 20 years ago. And one of the questions that stuck in my mind for a very long time was, why is it that the heroes of Genesis, for the most part, are pastoralists? Pastoralists are people who herd animals. They could be sheep, goats, cattle, camels, whatever. But they are the heroes of the great bulk of Genesis. Why? Well, let's get into it. The place to start is Cain and Abel. Now, you remember that Adam and Eve had sex, I guess, for the first time, and maybe I'll get into that in another episode, but for right now, know that they had two sons. They had Cain and they had Abel. And Cain planted crops, and Abel tended sheep. And the order is archaeologically correct, that the domestication of plants came first, and then the domestication of animals came second. And once that happened, there was a division that was a really important division, because they both need land, and they would both like the best land. They'd like the land that's flat and well watered and plenty to eat and everything. But the agriculturalists, by and large, got that flat, well-watered land, because without it they can't do anything. They can't plant crops in the mountains. They can't plant crops in the wilderness. They need water. They need, to a degree, they need flat land. I mean, obviously in Asia they were able to build huge terraces in mountainous regions, but that took a lot of effort and labor, and initially that was not possible. So the domesticated plant people took the flat land and well-watered land, and they had to be stuck in one place for a long time, because you've got to tend your crops. You don't just sort of scatter some seed and then disappear for 6 months and come back and harvest. You have to plow and sow and weed, and then reap and store and all the rest of it. So you end up building cities, or at least villages, and you end up settling down. That's the nature of the domestication of plants. Animals are very different. You can be nomadic with animals. You can take them with you to different places, and you can also live in wild places and in rocky places. You can live up in the mountains, and sheep and goats can get up and down the mountains fairly easily. I mean, they're pretty sure-footed, and they can eat the scrub and grass and leaves and so forth, which humans can't eat. And they turn that stuff that humans can't eat into milk and meat and horn and bone and wool and all the rest of it. And so they are wonderfully productive, but the people who look after them have to be kind of wild, because they have to live in those areas too, maybe living in tents. And they have another thing that they have to do that the agriculturalists don't have to do, very often anyway, is that they have to kill the animals now and again. So they have the technology of death. So they're mobile, they're killers. And so they're to be feared. Because if you are living a comfortable life in a village or a city on the plains, and you've got lots going for you, now and again you might be surprised by a herd of pastoralists, not of sheep, of pastoralists with weapons up coming to kill you if you don't give them what they want. They want, of course, the things that you have, flour or grains or vegetables, or like the things that you grow that they need to survive just as much as they need their meat, protein and dairy products and so forth. They need your stuff too. Maybe pottery, because if you're living in a village, you can also build a kiln and you can fire pots and so forth. Whereas people who are nomadic, they can do it. You can fire pottery in an open fire, but it's not anywhere near as good as you can get in a kiln. So you end up with a division. You've got these sedentary, fairly well-off people living in villages and cities, and you've got these ruthless, nomadic pastoralists, and they need each other for various reasons, and they're either going to trade and work it out somehow, or they're going to fight it out. And that's what the story of Cain and Abel is all about. Cain is this settled pastoral agriculturalist, with crops and stuff, and Abel keeps sheep. And they decide, okay, we're going to give a sacrifice to God. God in the story of Cain and Abel is called Yahweh, or at least that's how we think it's spelled. It's 4 letters, Y-W-H, Yahweh. Wait a minute, Y-W, Yahweh. Y-W, Yahweh. Oh yeah, Y-H-W-H. I knew I'd get it eventually. And so Yahweh. So Yahweh's their God. He's created Adam and Eve, and Adam and Eve, of course, know Yahweh and worship Him. And Cain and Abel, after they've produced their first crops and flocks and so forth, give an offering, a sacrifice to God. And Cain brings some produce from the earth, and Abel brings a young lamb. And they offer them on an altar in a fire, and God smells the smoke from both, and He likes the meat and He doesn't like the grain. And Cain gets pissed. Well, commentators have made all kinds of stories about how Abel brought the choicest of the flock, or the choicest meat, the choicest lamb, whatever. That's what the text actually says. Doesn't say anything about Cain's offering. And so they assume, well, Cain just sort of threw anything together, whereas Abel was really careful. Well, take a step back. Neither of them were required to sacrifice anything. The laws about sacrifice were not codified until the time of Moses. That's a long way away. That's not even in the book of Genesis at all. Now, Genesis ends with with Joseph. And then we have to get into Egypt and slavery and freeing the slaves in the book of Exodus. That's way, way into the future. So right here, right now, same as with Noah. Noah gave an offering after he had been released from the ark. He didn't have to do it either. There was no requirement. And there's certainly no requirement for Cain or Abel to sacrifice anything. But they both did, out of some kind of intuitive generosity or something like that. And Yahweh said, yeah, I like the meat. I don't like the bread or the wheat or whatever. Well, there is actually an obvious set of reasons for that. One of them is that in the thought of the ancient world as characterized by Genesis, in Hebrew, living things have what's called nephesh. Nephesh can sort of be translated as the breath of life, but it's like something like spirit, I guess. And when Adam was first created out of clay by God, he was just clay, and Yahweh breathed nephesh into him, and he became a living thing with nephesh. Plants don't have nephesh, like they don't have breath. So in the ancient Hebrew tradition, like plants are not really living things in the same way that animals are. And we kind of feel the same way too. I mean, like there's a lot of people who want to be vegans or vegetarians because they think that harvesting wheat is not the same as killing a lamb. And I think we could have a long discussion about whether you're killing the wheat or not when you harvest it, when you cut it down. But it doesn't cry, it doesn't bleed, whereas lambs cry and bleed. And there's something about the story of Cain and Abel that essentially says that God likes the people who kill things, who make them cry and bleed, and who offer some of them to him. That's what he wants. He doesn't want wheat or bread or peas or beans or whatever. And by the way, I mean, this is just a slight detour. Like fish at all. Like never bring fish to the altar. It's not good. Even though fish is clean to eat, it's not good to sacrifice. So you can sacrifice wheat, and there are laws about it, but God clearly prefers the products of the pastoralist. And so my question is why? Because these books were all put together by priests. They weren't pastoralists. They lived in cities. They lived, comfortable lives in cities, rich lives in cities. But the whole content of Genesis is about the power of the pastoralist. And obviously one is that they possess the ability to kill. They're also kind of devious, if you could put it that way. Like they live in these secluded places that they easily can defend. Like if they descend on a city and rob and kill and what have you, they can then just disappear into the mountains. And if you come after them, hey, good luck, because they're going to be hidden in all these mountainous, rocky places, and you're going to be coming up to them. They're going to be on the top, and they're going to be able to still come down on you and cause all kinds of problems. They're the ones that God likes, because they're survivors. They know how to survive. And so even down into the monarchy, like David is a shepherd, and he's skillful. skillful just with a sling and stones. Because he fights lions in his spare time when he's looking after his sheep. Those are the people that are the champions of Genesis. And I won't go into any more detail than that for now, because that's quite enough. But any anthropologist reading Genesis can look at all the things, their marriage practices, their lineage practices, their living practices, and so forth. And they look at the pastoralists and say, yeah, we know what that's like, because we have studied pastoralists for 100 years. Pastoralists in Africa, in India, in China, and they all pretty much do the same thing. And they're all pretty much to be feared. And just, final point, in the musical Oklahoma, right, there's a famous song, although I don't quite remember I think it's something like "The farmer and the cowman must be friends." Because in Oklahoma you see Genesis reappearing. The farmers are all, hardworking, dull, and the cows, men, like cowboys, like they're all rough and kind of dangerous, and all the women like them because they're the bad boys, right? They're the guys who shoot and ride horses and so forth, and and that's who the women like, and so you get the farmer and the cowman must be friends. Well, that's the farmer saying that because the farmers are afraid of the cowboys. All right, well, that's it for today. I think I'll probably cook something on Friday, but I'm not sure yet. But have a wonderful week, and I'll be back on Friday with something I don't know. Meanwhile, please tell your friends about my videos. Please like, please subscribe, and have a good week.